If we think of major events in the past 20 years that changed our world, there's a particular moment that stands as a catalyst to so much that has defined our era and impacted millions of people. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 changed much about the world as we know it and ushered in a new era of conflict and fear. From mass government surveillance, new immigration programs alongside growing anti-immigrant sentiment and Islamophobia, to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and even the rise of Daesh. On September 11, 2001, 19 militants associated with Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 aeroplanes and carried out suicide attacks against targets in the United States. 2 of the planes were flown into New York's iconic Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. A 3rd plane hit the Pentagon just outside Washington, D.C., and the 4th plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. A total of 2,996 people from 78 countries were killed in the attacks. The human cost of the attacks was huge, yet the unfolding impact would be even bigger.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
Using the war on terror as an excuse, the US initiated wars in Afghanistan and then Iraq, leading to serious consequences on the lives and livelihoods of the people of these countries. At least 37 million people have been displaced as a direct result of the wars fought by the United States since September 11, 2001. According to a report published in 2020 by the Brown University's Costs of War project, this estimate is very conservative, and the actual number could go up to as much as 59 million people. And one of the countries most affected by US military intervention is Afghanistan, which resulted in almost 5.3 million people being displaced. Less than a month after the September 11 attacks, the US and its allies started bombing Afghanistan, and days later, ground forces arrived. The mission of the invasion was to topple the Taliban for providing sanctuary for Al-Qaeda, and to kill the Al-Qaeda leader and 9/11 mastermind, Osama bin Laden. Within a few weeks, the Taliban lost control of the capital Kabul, and Osama bin Laden escaped to neighboring Pakistan. But the war dragged on for years, eventually becoming the US's longest ever war. In fact, the US failed to eradicate the Taliban, and in 2020 they signed a peace deal with the group aiming for a final withdrawal of US troops. The war created a permanent state of instability and destruction, and according to the United Nations, more than 100,000 Afghan civilians have been killed or injured since 2009, when it began systematically recording civilian casualties. Death tolls for the previous 8 years of war before then are still not entirely known, and the total human devastation for the last 19 years is incalculable.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
On March 19, 2003, the United States, along with coalition forces, invaded Iraq in defiance of international law. The war, contrary to Bush's statements, neither freed Iraqis nor did it save the world from the weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein didn't actually have. Though the plan to topple Saddam Hussein was successful, the war in Iraq ravaged the country, engulfed it in a sectarian war that went on for years and led to the rise and formation of the world's most dangerous terrorist group. 17 years after it began, the US invasion of Iraq lived up to the fears of all who opposed it. The US war and the insurgencies of militias claimed the lives of about 500,000 Iraqis from 2003 to 2011 and over 4,500 US servicemen. The large-scale instability led to the displacement and migration of millions of Iraqis and ravaged the country's economy and infrastructure. The war resulted in empowering Al-Qaeda-linked insurgencies that later paved the way for the rise of Daesh. When the US forces withdrew from Iraq in 2011, they left a weakened government unable to take responsibility of the country's security, and within months, the remnants of al-Qaeda, under the new name of Daesh, exploited the power vacuum. Over the next few years, Daesh took advantage of growing instability in Iraq and Syria, carrying out attacks to bolster its ranks. At its height, Daesh controlled a region covering a third of Syria and about 40% of Iraq. Although the US's war on terror took on its most aggressive forms in the foreign interventions of Iraq and Afghanistan, it also had significant, long-lasting impacts on US domestic policies. The 9/11 attack ushered in a new generation of policies which prioritized national security and defense, often at the expense of civil liberties and human rights. The attacks defined the administration of George W.Bush and led to the largest government defense restructuring since the creation of the Department of Defense. The failure to unveil the biggest terrorist attack on US soil and the lack of coordination and intelligence sharing among government agencies led to the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, a cabinet-level office that merged 22 government agencies with the primary mission to prevent terrorist attacks within the United States and to reduce the vulnerability of the United States to terrorism.
With the Homeland Security Act, we're doing everything we can to protect America.
Among the agencies that fell under the Department of Homeland Security, a number of them were consolidated into what is now known as the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. ICE was granted a unique combination of civil and criminal authority to arrest, detain, and deport unauthorized immigrants already inside the United States. Since its formation, the agency has been responsible for a massive increase in deportations and gained a controversial reputation, especially when Donald Trump came to power and introduced a zero-tolerance policy towards undocumented migrants. Many US lawmakers are now calling to abolish ICE, arguing that immigration issues should be separate from criminal enforcement. But why is immigration tied to the war against terrorism? Well, according to a 2019 post by ICE, the agency named the prevention of another 9/11 as the reason why its employees go to work each day. The post, of course, faced backlash over tying migrants to terrorism, but this is hardly new in post-9/11 America. Muslims and people who might be perceived as Muslims suffered from increasing hate crimes after the 9/11 attacks. For many, they were an easy scapegoat for a grieving America. According to an FBI report, hate crimes against Muslims are approximately 5 times more frequent than they were before 2001. The fear of Muslims and surveillance of Muslim communities have become the new reality for American Muslims. In 2011, the Associated Press revealed in a series of investigations that the New York Police Department's clandestine spying program monitored daily life in Muslim communities, resulting in congressional calls for a federal investigation. Asad Dandia was one of the Muslims illegally monitored by the NYPD in 2012. Back then, he was a 19-year-old student active in a charity organization, and he had no history of criminal activities. This is what he had to say about his experience.
Quite simply, it was discriminatory surveillance. We didn't have to be doing anything wrong to have them surveil us. It's the very fact that we were consciously Muslim and consciously active, and that was a sufficient enough cause for them to surveil us.
In 2012, it was revealed that the controversial NYPD surveillance unit that catalogued information on Muslim communities never produced a lead that was linked to a potential terrorist plot during its years of investigating. But the massive increase in surveillance post 9/11 did not only breach the privacy of Muslim communities, it went far deeper. The US intelligence state bloomed in the wake of 9/11. Government oversight increased through a vast clandestine network of phone and web surveillance. In 2013, Edward Snowden, a former contractor for the CIA, leaked to the media that US spy agencies had built an intelligence-gathering colossus since the 9/11 attacks that conducted extensive internet and phone surveillance of millions of Americans. The US National Security Agency has also tapped directly into the servers of 9 internet firms, including Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo, to track online communication in a surveillance program known as PRISM. Snowden's revelations in 2013 made the American public aware of PRISM's existence for the first time, even though it began in 2007 under the Bush administration. Amid the furor over the revelations, the Pew Research Center found that 47% of Americans were concerned that anti-terror programs had gone too far in restricting civil liberties. The US's involvement in the war on terror, prompted by the 9/11 terrorist attacks, resulted in a dramatic change in the country's foreign and domestic policies. But most importantly, the country's military interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere in the world have left devastating impacts and far-reaching consequences, the scope of which are yet to be known.